Midnight at the warehouse. Jessica parked her car under the flickering streetlight, the only working one in the dilapidated lot outside the old Riverton Warehouse. She checked her watch. 11:45 p.m. She had 15 minutes to prepare before her shift started. Tonight was her first night on the job as a security guard, and she couldn't shake off the unease that had settled in her stomach. Ever since she accepted the position, she reminded herself that it was just a warehouse, albeit an old and creepy one. Nothing to worry about. She stepped out of her car, the chill night air nipping at her skin. Pulling her jacket tighter, she glanced around the deserted lot. The warehouse loomed ahead, a monolith of aged brick and broken windows. It had been out of commission for years, abandoned after the shipping company that owned it went bankrupt. Recently, a new company had purchased it, and Jessica's job was to keep an eye on the place while they made plans to renovate. The front entrance was a heavy, rusted metal door. Jessica used her keycard to swipe through the security panel. The door groaned as it opened, the sound echoing through the vast, empty space inside. She stepped in, the door slamming shut behind her with a finality that sent a shiver down her spine. The interior of the warehouse was cavernous, filled with the remnants of its previous life. Stacks of old pallets, rusted machinery, and scattered debris. The dim emergency lights cast eerie shadows, transforming mundane objects into ominous figures. Jessica's footsteps echoed as she walked, the sound amplifying the emptiness around her. She reached the security office, a small room at the back of the warehouse, and unlocked the door. The office was a stark contrast to the rest of the building. Clean, modern, and equipped with a bank of monitors displaying various parts of the warehouse. Jessica settled into the chair and began her routine check, switching through the camera feeds. Everything seemed normal. Empty, but normal. Midnight came and went without incident. Jessica was starting to relax, convincing herself that the only thing she had to fear was her own overactive imagination. She decided to take a walk around the perimeter to keep herself alert. As she stepped out of the office, the cold air hit her again. She walked down the main corridor, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The warehouse felt even more desolate now, the silence oppressive. Her footsteps echoed, creating a rhythm that was oddly comforting. She turned a corner and almost tripped over an old wooden crate. Swearing under her breath, she steadied herself and pointed her flashlight at it. She turned a corner and almost tripped over an old wooden crate. Swearing under her breath, she steadied herself and pointed her flashlight at it. Just as she was about to continue, she heard a noise. It was faint, like a whisper carried on the wind. Jessica froze, straining her ears to catch it again. There it was, soft, almost indistinguishable, but definitely a voice. Her pulse quickened. She wasn't alone. "Hello?" she called out, her voice trembling slightly. There was no response. She slowly advanced, her flashlight sweeping the area. The sound seemed to be coming from deeper within the warehouse. Jessica followed the noise, her nerves on edge. The whispering grew louder, more distinct, yet she couldn't make out any words. It was unsettling, like a conversation just out of reach. She rounded another corner, and the whispering stopped abruptly. The sudden silence was deafening. She found herself in front of a large, locked storage room. She checked the door, and to her surprise, it was slightly ajar. The lock was broken, hanging uselessly from the latch. Jessica's heart pounded in her chest as she pushed the door open with a creak. The room was pitch dark. She swept her flashlight around, revealing stacks of old boxes and broken equipment. The air was musty, filled with the scent of decay. Jessica stepped inside, her flashlight flickering as if in protest. She caught a glimpse of movement in the corner of her eye and whipped around, but there was nothing there. Her mind was playing tricks on her, she told herself. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind her, plunging her into darkness. Jessica's breath caught in her throat. She turned towards the door, but before she could reach it, she felt a cold hand on her shoulder. She screamed, spinning around, but her flashlight went out, leaving her in complete darkness. She fumbled with the flashlight, her fingers trembling. Finally, it flickered back to life, and she swept the beam around the room frantically. There was no one there. She was alone, but she could still feel the lingering touch of the cold hand on her shoulder. Jessica forced herself to calm down. She needed to get out of this room. She moved towards the door, her flashlight revealing the path ahead. As she reached for the handle, she heard the whispering again, louder this time, right behind her. She turned slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. Standing in the middle of the room was a figure, barely visible in the dim light. It was a man, his features obscured by shadows. He stood motionless, watching her. Jessica's mind raced. She had to get out. Now. She yanked the door open and ran, not daring to look back. Her footsteps echoed through the warehouse as she sprinted towards the security office. She could still hear the whispering, following her, chasing her. She burst into the office and slammed the door shut, locking it behind her. Breathing heavily, she checked the monitors. All the feeds were static. Panic set in. She grabbed her phone to call for help, but there was no signal. She was trapped. Jessica huddled in the corner of the office, her flashlight pointed at the door. Minutes felt like hours as she waited, the silence pressing in on her. Just when she thought she couldn't take it anymore, the monitors flickered back to life. The feeds were clear again, showing the empty warehouse. She let out a shaky breath, trying to convince herself that it was over. But then she saw it. On one of the monitors, in the storage room she had just fled, the figure stood, staring directly at the camera. His eyes were hollow, his face twisted into a grotesque smile. He raised a hand and pointed, as if he could see her through the screen. Jessica's blood ran cold. She backed away from the monitors, her eyes never leaving the screen. The figure took a step forward, then another, moving closer to the camera. She could hear the whispering again, filling the room. It was all around her, suffocating her. The lights in the office flickered, then went out. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. Jessica felt a presence behind her, cold and malevolent. She turned slowly, her flashlight shaking in her hand. There he was, standing in the doorway. His eyes were dark voids, his smile a rictus of terror. He stepped into the room, the whispering reaching a crescendo. Jessica screamed, dropping her flashlight. The last thing she saw was his hand reaching out for her, cold and relentless. The next morning, the new security guard arrived for his shift, finding the warehouse silent and empty. The security office was locked from the inside. When he finally managed to open the door, he found it deserted. Jessica was gone, her flashlight lying on the floor, its beam flickering weakly. The monitors showed nothing but static. The police were called, but they found no trace of Jessica. Her disappearance was a mystery, one that would haunt the warehouse for years to come. And on quiet nights, when the wind blew just right, some said you could still hear the whispering, echoing through the empty halls of the Riverton Warehouse. A chilling reminder of what had happened at midnight. For more scary odd horror stories, please subscribe us.